Good morning. I'm Ward 1 Councilmember Brianne Nadeau, the Chair of the Committee on Public Works and Operations. Today is Tuesday, July 2nd, 2024, and I'm calling to order this meeting of the committee to conduct a public hearing on Bill 25-749 and 25-639. The time is 10:13 a.m. Today, we'll hear from public witnesses as we consider two bills. B25-749, the Amplified Sound Mitigation Act of 2024, and B25-639, the Licensing for Accountability of Management of Properties Amendment Act of 2023, or LAMP Act. The Amplified Sound Mitigation Act of 2024 was introduced by Chairman Mendelson and co-introduced by myself, Councilmember Pinto, and Councilmember Bonds. This legislation will protect the vibrant musical and cultural history of neighborhoods and residents who have lived or moved here and appreciate that culture while establishing reasonable protections for residents from excessive amplified sound. The Amplified Sound Mitigation Act is a product of collaboration with residents and the DC music community. There are legitimate concerns about the disruption caused by amplifiers turned up far too loud, whether that's for music performance or a speaker on the street. On our witness list today are representatives from Central Columbia Heights and from residents in Gallery Place, two hotspots for this tension, as both ward council members know all too well. Between 2018 and 2021, there was legislation, the Amplified Noise Amendment Act, that attempted to address these problems. However, it did so in a way that was overly punitive to performers and would have damaged the district's rich cultural fabric. As the Ward 1 council member, I represent constituents whose lives are regularly disrupted by amplified performance, but I also represent the community around the Go-Go store at 7th and Florida, where complaints about a single amplifier kicked off the Don't Mute DC movement. I want to thank Chairman Mendelson for his openness to working with me to refine the legislation he introduced a few years ago. That collaboration resulted in the bill we are considering today. There are two notable changes from previous versions of this bill. First, it sets a clear, consistent, and easy-to-measure standard for amplified decibel level limits by allowing for measurement at the point of amplification, meaning right against the amp itself, rather than needing measurements from inside nearby buildings. This is important to note. 95 decibels at the point of amplification roughly translates to about 50 to 60 decibels in a nearby building. A limit of 95 decibels may look high if you're just glancing at the bill text, but 95 decibels is only what you would get if you had your ear pressed right up to the amp. In addition to streamlining government enforcement, a point of amplification standard allows performers to self-enforce, which would otherwise be nearly impossible. The second update is clarifying that the Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection is the primary agency for enforcement of amplified sound standards. The bill as introduced does not remove any authority from MPD or other enforcement agencies. Additionally, the bill would allow for payment plans for anyone fined for noncompliance. This bill has a complementary piece of legislation, the Harmonious Living Amendment Act of 2024, which covers other policies related to music and soundproofing. I authored and introduced that bill, also with Chairman Mendelson and Councilmember Pinto, and I'm looking forward to Chairman Mendelson holding a hearing this fall so these two bills can be moved in tandem before the end of the council period. The second bill up for consideration today is the Licensing for Accountability of Management of Properties Amendment Act of 2023, or LAMP Act. The LAMP Act was introduced by council members Bonds and Gray and creates a licensure structure for property management companies. Currently, DC Code requires that individual property managers obtain a professional license from the Real Estate Commission, but the organization that operates as a property management company is not required to obtain any specific licensure. This leaves no mechanism to hold these entities accountable for wrongdoing or violation of business law. The legislation was developed to address cases of misconduct, such as the case of Lorraine Sior, who embezzled over $380,000 between 2001 and 2011 while working at various property management firms across the district. These actions by Ms. Sior harmed various small property owners, including some housing cooperatives. I'd now like to provide some logistical announcements for today's hearing. In addition to Zoom, this hearing is being live broadcast at brianneknadeau.com/live. In order to ensure we hear from all members of the public, I ask that all witnesses stick to their allotted time. Witnesses testifying on behalf of an organization will have 5 minutes to provide oral testimony, and all other witnesses will have 3 minutes. I'd also like to provide some detailed reminders about the Zoom platform and the committee protocols for the witnesses participating today. All witnesses participating in this hearing via Zoom are currently listed as attendees in Zoom. That means that your microphones are muted and your video cameras are turned off. But when it's your turn to join a panel for testimony, I'll call your name. If you're here in person at that time, please come take a seat at the witness table. If you are on the Zoom, a member of my staff will change your status to a panelist. You will receive an invitation that you have to accept to join the panel. If you wish to activate your video while you testify, you must click the button in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen that looks like a video camera. Please remain muted until it is your turn to testify. When it's your turn, unmute yourself or make sure your microphone is turned on if you're here in person. For everyone, there's a clock keeping your time. When your time is up, I kindly ask that you conclude your remarks so we can ensure that everyone has had a chance to be heard. For any difficulties in the Zoom, send a message to the host labeled as Committee on Public Works and Operations or committee staff, and they'll follow up with you. If you are having trouble gaining access to the Zoom and you've pre-registered, you can email us at publicworks@dccouncil.gov so that we can resolve your issue. We've now been joined by Councilmember Brooke Pinto from Ward 2, who I will recognize for any opening remarks she might have.
Councilor Nadeau, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yes, okay, great. I'm calling in. Sorry, my audio is having some issues. Well, good morning, and thank you so much, Chairwoman Nadeau, for scheduling this hearing and working with us on these very important issues. I co-introduced the Amplified Sound Mitigation Act of 2024 because of the significant impact that excessive sound levels has on so many of our residents' daily lives. I often hear from constituents about how amplified sound, such as from speakers or megaphones, affects not only their livelihood, but their health and well-being. Excessive noise can lead to health issues, including increased stress, high blood pressure, sleep disruptions. In fact, hearing loss can begin at 85 decibels when the exposure is long or repeated, and is often irreversible damage that can happen to the eardrums. The higher the decibels, the louder the sound, and the less time it takes for hearing loss to occur. I believe that this bill is an important start toward clear, enforceable regulations, and I'm looking forward to the discussion today and consideration from health experts about maximum sound levels to ensure that we are sufficiently protecting our residents' hearing and their health. By setting new limits on maximum sound levels for amplified sound in public space and improving how sound is measured, this bill will help to balance the beauty and energy that performers bring to our neighborhoods with the real health impacts that our residents are experiencing. The bill also clarifies that DLCP is the primary agency responsible for enforcing sound regulations rather than defaulting to MPD, which serves two purposes. First, it places responsibility with the agency best suited to enforce the regulations. And second, it frees up time and resources for our law enforcement to focus on public safety while ensuring that concerns about amplified sound are heard and handled with appropriate care. I do want to note that if we move forward in this direction, we need to make sure that DLCP has the resources and the infrastructure in place to actually respond to these calls of service, especially those that happen during non-traditional business hours. I'm grateful for the input that our office has received from many neighbors and stakeholders over many years. I have been working hard on this issue since joining the council to move this bill forward and know that this is very important to many residents. Our artists, performers, and entrepreneurs add vibrancy and energy to our communities for our businesses, residents, and visitors, and it's critical that all of these communities can continue to thrive in harmony. This is not about undermining our rich music and art scene here in the district, which is a wonderful piece of our culture in DC. but this is about reasonable guardrails when noise is amplified at unreasonable volumes in public spaces. And to accomplish that, we must ensure that our regulatory environment reflects the technological advances that we have experienced. This bill, in conjunction with Bill 25-750, the Harmonious Living Amendment Act of 2024, which was referred to the Committee of the Whole, I believe strikes the appropriate balance to safeguard the vibrancy of our neighborhoods that support artists and entertainment venues without unreasonable residential disturbance. I look forward to hearing from witnesses today and tomorrow about this important legislation and hope to see this bill move quickly for full consideration of the Council. Thank you very much again, Chairwoman Nadeau.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Excuse me. For your opening. We will now hear from our first panel. Eric Jones, Vice President of Government Affairs, DC, Commercial, the Apartment and Office Building Association of Metro Washington. Liz DeBarros, CEO of the District of Columbia Building Industry Association. Anthony Thomas Davis, Commissioner, ANC 1A06. Marie Drissel, Kimon Freeman from We Act Radio, and Howard Marks, the Residences at Gallery Place Condominium Association Vice President. We'll begin with our virtual witnesses, and then we will move to our witness who is here in the room with us. So beginning with Mr. Jones, you may begin when you're ready. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairwoman Nadeau and members of the Committee on Public Works and Operations. I am Eric J. Jones, and I'm here today representing the members of the Apartment and Office Building Association of Metropolitan Washington, or AOBA. For the last 50 years, AOBA has been the preeminent advocate for commercial office buildings and multifamily residential real estate in Washington, D.C. area. Our owners, managers, and service providers represent 172 million square feet of commercial space and more than 400,000 residential units within the District, Maryland, and Virginia. The district, we represent 76.6 million square feet of commercial space and around 108,000 apartment units. As a proud fourth-generation Washingtonian district resident who also has the honor of serving as AOBA's VP of Government Affairs for the commercial portfolio within the district, I'm pleased to offer our support of B25-0749, the Amplified Sound Mitigation Act of 2024. Councilwoman, over the last several legislative cycles, you have shown a real dedication to promoting an agreeable live, work, and play environment by balancing the district's unique blend of social, cultural, and political theater. As we continue the process of reimagining the next version of the district, which will include new housing coupled with commercial property and collaborative spaces throughout all 8 wards, we are excited about the opportunities to expand the vibrant mix of live entertainment, cultural displays, and First Amendment demonstrations juxtaposed against the backdrop of office and residential living. While we know that this is but one aspect of moving ahead within the legislative process, we want to reiterate our support for this legislation and commit to working with you and the committee to address our concerns during the markup and before the bill reaches the Committee of the Whole. While we are happy to see the enforcement mechanism for this legislation placed within the DC Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection, or DLCP, we are unsure how this will be implemented. We are unsure if the goal would be to create a one-size-fits-all document covering buskers, parade, block parties, concert venues, First Amendment demonstrations, and loud automobiles. Additionally, we are unsure that additional licensing should be needed. In addition to our concerns about the details of how DLCP will enforce the legislation, we are concerned also with the language requiring identification with a valid address. While this may be a technical issue, we know that there are federally government issued real identification forms such as U.S. passports and U.S. passport cards, or international passports for that matter, that are federally accepted but don't contain a valid address. As a global destination that witnesses demonstrations among tourists from all over the world, we are cautious about creating a situation in which individuals are unfairly detained or deterred from participating in all that the district has to offer simply because of a form of identification. In closing, I want to express my sincere gratitude for the opportunity to testify on this legislation. I am available now or after the hearing to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Ms. DeBarros?
Good morning, Chairman Nadeau, and also Mr. Mendelson, Council Chair Mendelson. I wanted to thank both of you for co-introducing this legislation, Amplified Noise Sound Mitigation Act of 2024, and also Brooke Pinto, Councilmember Pinto, who's been a champion for our building and for downtown and all the residents who suffer under the constant din of this amplified noise. I'm the Vice President of the Residents at Gallery Place Condominium Association. We are located at the foot of the Chinatown Friendship Arch, and we are next to the Capital One Arena. We have 192 units with approximately 300 residents. We are a racially and economically diverse building. Many of us have chosen to live downtown here to be near our work, museums, art galleries, and Metro. We applaud Mayor Bowser's efforts to grow the number of residents downtown. This legislation is critical not only to our building, but indeed to the future of downtown. When there is an event at the Capital One Arena, which happens about 225 nights a year, roughly, our residents are tormented by buskers who regularly and willfully play amplified music at ear-shattering levels. Few are genuine musicians, but play recorded music on oversized amplifiers, far louder than necessary to attract the donations they are seeking, and well above the limits set by current law. Efforts to enforce the existing law have been futile, as the Department of Licensing and Consumer Affairs refuses to send out inspectors at night when almost all of the excessive noise occurs. Further, they've informed us they have only one certified inspector on staff. When this person is on another assignment or off, there is no one certified to take readings. My wife and I spent $6,000 to install special noise insulated window glass, and I was forced to be fitted with hearing aids, which retail for over $4,000 before being covered by insurance. Fortunately, I only paid half of that out of pocket. This is what the Washington Post reported on January the 18th, 2024. For the past several years, Ted Leonsis and his associates have been tormented by a sidewalk show at the mouth of Gallery Place Alley along the Capital One Arena. People who frequented the bustling zone are familiar with the act, which consists of a man named David Hellman queuing up beats and singing along with his sidekicks, 2 boys, and then finally 3 who front for the operation. All this happens with ear-splitting volume and loudspeakers. This noise radiates into our condos, businesses, and so on. We are reviewing the legislation for the first time just hours before the hearing. So we respectfully ask, Madam Chairman, that we have additional time to get back to you with more complete study of how this bill could become more effective. For example, we believe the busker should be licensed by the city. Collection of fines for violating the ordinance will be problematic, as many of the buskers live outside the district. However, the threat of losing a performance license will surely get their attention. We applaud the provision allowing agencies to enforce the noise limits outside of DLCA operating hours, but the legislation must name the default agency and give them the power to issue enforceable citations. The ultimate solutions might be to require the agency, DCLA, to operate at night and weekends for the purpose of enforcing the noise regulations. Also, to have enough certified sound meters to do the job on a citywide basis. Also, the requirement that sounds measured at the source should not exceed 95 decibels seems to me awfully loud. We recommend that the DC Department of Health be asked to come up with sound level recommendations. Hearing loss is a huge problem in our society, robbing seniors of their hearing, plus costing hundreds of millions of dollars in additional expense to buy hearing aids and visit audiologists and physicians. Madam Chairperson, that concludes my written statement. I would be happy to entertain your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marks. We'll do a round of questions shortly. Ms. DeBarros?
Good morning, Chair Nadeau, Councilmember Pinto, and members of the committee and staff. My name is Liz DeBarros, CEO of DC Building Industry Association, and I'm a longtime Ward 7 resident. On behalf of DCBIA, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the Amplified Sound Mitigation Act of 2024. DCBIA is the lead organization focused on development in the district. We work daily with the economic realities and physical realities of building sustainable projects and communities. It's crucial to preserve our neighborhoods, vibrant musical cultural history while balancing the need for reasonable protections against amplified sound. This legislation maintains the delicate balance between these two important issues, allowing culture and quality of life to coexist. In the district, public space includes all publicly owned property within the property lines of a street, park, and other public property, including roadways and sidewalks. These areas are vital to residents and businesses, contributing to commerce and community. Excessive amplified sound in public spaces can disturb businesses and residents and deter visitors. We appreciate Chairman Mendelson's careful consideration of residents and businesses' concerns and the subsequent changes to the bill reflecting their feedback. As the district strives to fill and transform spaces, addressing disturbances that deter growth is essential. We also appreciate that the bill designates the Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection to enforce new rules, which would help deter violators. However, most people will likely call 911 to voice complaints rather than DLCP or 311. Therefore, coordination between MPD and DLCP is expected. Additionally, allowing violators to repay fines using a payment plan ensures the fines are not overly burdensome. As the district evolves, having proper laws to balance preserving cultural and artistic expression with new building uses and residential growth is key. This legislation honors both. We support the historical significance of public performers and believe their expression can continue in a way that minimizes complaints and negative impacts on public spaces. We hope the legislation moves forward as written. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
We have been joined by our council chairman, Phil Mendelson. Okay. We are actually going to start with a round of questions. So we will do 7-minute rounds. Okay. I'll start, then we'll go to Councilmember Pinto, then we'll go to Chairman Mendelson based on order of arrival. So we'll start with Mr. Jones. Thank you very much for your testimony. And I want to clarify for you, because you had raised this point, that the legislation does not create a licensure structure or other requirement for street performances or demonstrations, but it does create enforceable sound levels for any and everyone out in public spaces. And I appreciate your concerns about access to identification, and really do look forward to continuing to work on this legislation because I know it impacts your members. While I have both you and Mr. Barrows here, while this question is actually more related to our other bill, the Harmonious Living Act, I think it's worth asking now, what's the current environment of soundproofing practices and new construction?
I think it varies by location. So for example, there was a project that was built about 10 or 11 years ago that I know, I want to say it's in Upper Ward 3. And to be honest, when they opened the building, they literally tested the soundproof, the sound of the building by having a fire department. They paid a fee, of course, come up and blast the sirens outside the building to see if they could actually hear them inside, and you could not hear them inside. And that was, like I said, 2012, 2013. Other times you have you have soundproofing that's done more so based on the location or parts of the city. And I think that's kind of how it's been done across the board for the last 15 to 20 years. The level of soundproofing you're going to have somewhere like Adams Morgan, Columbia Heights, the Wharf, or one of the bed areas downtown is going to be different than the types of soundproofing you're going to have in some more residential or more low scale areas of the city, because you just don't perceive that you're going to need that much soundproofing. There's not necessarily there's standard minimums you have, be it in forms of windows, R ratings for insulation, et cetera. It's indoors, but outside of those minimum ratings, you're not going to get a standard that's going to say we need to block out, let's say, 75 decibels or above, just because it varies by where you're at in the city.
Mr. Barros?
Yeah, I think Eric covered that really well. We are reviewing the harmonious bill, the companion legislation, so our members can give more insight, I think, into sort of the differences that Eric pointed out and which part of town, what type of project it is. So we look forward to that, to that hearing too, and we're prepared. We'll be prepared.
Sound like folks may benefit from a standard sort of soundproofing measure, so that there doesn't have to be guesswork or a lot of calculation based on where in the city the building is located.
I think the one problem associated with that is the fact that a lot of the building in DC is retrofit, rehabs, et cetera, and how you define that form of new construction was always a problem. If you're looking at doing a retrofit or a rehab and you're not tearing down walls or major external infrastructure, you may not get new soundproofing that's going to be done. What that may do, unfortunately, is increase costs significantly and have a negative impact on the ability to do things to build affordable housing. And I think that's kind of how the way you have to look at it. I know that we've talked about this in years past with some of the legislation that was proposed, and that's exactly some of the problems we deal with. If you're looking at taking a 2-3 level property and making it condos, the level of soundproofing may be different than if you're doing let's say a stick build that's 2 or 3 levels tall. Just because you have different types of sound, different types of building structure, et cetera, and how they're going to look at it. And I think one of the things we see so often is that we're retrofitting or rehabbing properties that are 50, 60, 100 years old in the city, and you may not add those new soundproofing levels when you do so. I think that's where we run into a lot of the issues.
That makes sense. Thank you very much. Thank you both. And Mr. Marks, thank you for your continued engagement on this topic. The hearing record will be open until July 17th, so you will have additional time if you were taken by surprise here. Now, I wanted to ask you more about your experience when calling in sound complaints. You said that you typically contact DLCP, who often do not send inspectors because most of the sound happens at night or they don't have enough staff. Currently, MPD does have the authority to enforce sound complaints at night. What's been your experience with MPD assisting?
Well, actually, our experience with the Metropolitan Police Department is very good. They enforce the 10 p.m. Citywide noise curfew. So my wife and I and our fellow residents at the building have called MPD, and they've shut down these buskers within minutes. They've been awesome. We are so happy with MPD's enforcement of the 10 p.m. citywide noise curfew.
Thank you very much. And what do you see as a benefit of licensing musicians? You mentioned that.
I think that licensing is a way for them. First of all, who's out there, so you have an idea who the universe is. When they apply for the license, I would recommend that there be some sort of a training program. Many of these buskers, sadly, have never been told that when they turn the volume up too loudly, it repels people. They're not going to get the kind of donations that they want. And they need someone to tell them, turn it down, because it's going to help your cash flow. Thirdly, the provision for a up to $300 fine is great, but I don't see how that's ever going to be collected. But the threat of removing the license is a huge club the city could use to maintain some sort of a discipline out in the marketplace. Thank you.
Sure. One last one. Did you have a chance to be present when the field measurements were taken in Gallery Place that helped us inform the decibel limits in the bill?
I don't recall being present.
Okay.
Yeah. I do want to make mention that I think that the noise levels should be set by the Department of Health. Um, Clearly, none of us are audiologists. We have a significant number of out of town guests that go by our building daily. That number is increasing, thank goodness. And we have small children that are in tow, and they are being subjected to this loud noise. God knows how much damage is being done to their hearing. So I think the measurement should take place at the source, and the level should be set by the recommendation of the Department of Health. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now turn to Councilmember Pinto for her round.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Chairwoman Nadeau. So I want to pick up there actually with Mr. Marks about your experience with enforcement. So can you talk through kind of in practice what has happened, whether that be with MPD officer or DLCP, when you have called to report these excessive noise disturbances?
Yeah, I assume that question was directed to me. So,
Yes, sorry, for Mr. Marks.
okay. So, well, after 5 o'clock, they don't answer their phones. I mean, it used to be the Department of Consumer Regulatory Affairs. It wasn't, whether they were non-responsive, they just were not available after 5 p.m. on weekends, where 99% of this noise is generated. Like I said earlier, MPD has been fantastic in terms of enforcing the citywide 10 p.m. curfew. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Barros, do you have any view on the enforcement component, and the intersection between what buildings are seeing and what residents are seeing when it comes to the agency who should be responsible for enforcement?
I think the sort of concern on that, which we talked about, is just the coordination. Most people are just, when they have a disturbance, are going to call MPD. And so it's just going to be a natural thing. It's not, so coordination between the agencies is definitely needed. And that's what we hear, is this, people are going to call MPD.
Okay, thanks for raising that, because yeah, in a perfect world, we'd want the agency responsible for the regulation to be enforcing it, but we don't want a situation where there's actually no one enforcing it because it's removed from MPD jurisdiction. Mr. Jones, you mentioned a little bit in your testimony some of the ID issues. Can you extrapolate or elaborate a little more about your concern there?
Just the concept in the legislation, this is it's a certain form of ID that includes a valid address. And the concern with that is, for example, I have friends and colleagues who carry passports as their form of ID. They don't have an address on their passport, but it's a federally accepted form of identification. If they're out doing busker activities or they're part of a First Amendment demonstration, they can be detained for while having valid identification, which technically they have valid identification. It just doesn't have an address on it. And everyone doesn't have a driver's license or non-driver's ID. So forcing them to have an identification with an address on is something that many folks may not have. And it could be a deterrent, or it could actually unduly target certain communities, which could be problematic.
Okay, thank you so much for raising that. And we certainly have had some instances where identification has come up and it's led to a problem in enforcement. So thank you for raising that. Thank you all very much for your testimony and seeking to be a part of this solution as we get this balance right. Appreciate it. Thank you, Chairwoman Nadeau.
Thank you. We'll now turn to Chairman Mendelson for his round of questions.
Thank you. Thank you to each of the witnesses. I have a couple of questions. Mr. Jones, with regard to the identification, the challenge here is that individuals in the District of Columbia are now required to carry identification. And so then the legislation was crafted so that the how do I put this? We tried to figure out a way that if a person doesn't have identification, that the enforcement officer, who is not necessarily a police officer, could ascertain identification. It may not be foolproof. That is, there might be some folks who can get around it, which is of course not the goal. But what is the goal is that we have some ability to get buskers to turn it down. If you want to supplement your testimony, which would be helpful, and think about the identification requirement, think about the fact that we don't require that people have identification, and that is part of the challenge here.
Mr. Chairman, really quickly, I think from the standpoint I'm looking at it, I see amplified noises not just buskers. So for example, my office is downtown in the K Street corridor, and we have First Amendment demonstrations down here all the time in which we have decibel levels that are approaching 95, the threshold for this legislation. Many of those folks are international individuals. Those international folks may have another form of ID, such as a passport or a passport card or a card from their embassy, etc., that may not be that driver's license or non-driver's ID. And that's
Sure.
what I'm looking at, because when I look at this, it's not just the buskers that I'm worried about. It's the buskers, it's the First Amendment demonstrations, it's the folks who are playing their music really loud in these oversized automobile systems that are an expression of demonstration as well, that I also think about when I think about the amplified noise. So I'm thinking more so about those folks as opposed to just buskers, who are usually more localized or regional folks.
Well, you should think about them, but unfortunately, I think that's part of the challenge with this legislation is that I don't think the council is about to shut down First Amendment demonstrations. And some First Amendment demonstrations can be quite noisy, but they're also temporary. They also are usually not asking for cash donations. They are, well, I've kind of said it there, they're temporary and they're not asking for cash donations. I think what's most troublesome is, and it's not just a gallery place, but we see it around some of the metro stops and maybe a few other places in town, this just continuous day after day, night after night. I'm going to say noisemaking. If they're musicians, they probably would be offended by that, and I don't mean to offend them. So music making in their case. And so we're trying to find the right balance. But let me, before I use up all my time, turn to Mr. Marks. I think I know the answer. I'm going to ask the question. Is your goal here or of your neighbors that there should be no buskers?
Well, I think there's a difference between buskers and musicians. We have no problem with musicians. The ones who are really good, they mute, they play very relatively softly. They know how to appeal to a crowd. The buskers, many of them are untrained. They're there just to generate cash. They voice over amplified music at very loud levels. So yeah, we do have problem with buskers, but no problem with musicians. Thank you.
But the issue is to turn it down, not to eliminate it.
Of course not. They have First Amendment rights, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman. And you know, to turn it down to a reasonable level. And as I mentioned earlier in my testimony, that level should be set upon the recommendation of the DC Department of Health. Thank you.
Yes. Well, and the government's testifying tomorrow, and perhaps we can ask them, but they have been reluctant to suggest a decibel level. I will say this, in drafting the legislation, there's been another challenge, and that is, or maybe I already touched on this earlier, there are First Amendment demonstrations, and they sometimes their intent is to make loud noise. This bill doesn't differentiate based on content. So it's not that this bill's focused on music or that it would be focused on demonstrations. It's focused on noise. So that's why, as introduced, the bill landed at 95, because we know that when you get to 100, over 100, it can be very quickly damaging to people who are within whatever the distance is. And I say that with some vagueness because the distance varies depending upon the decibel level, as you know. but 100 is more injurious than 95.
Well, I would recommend, Mr. Chairman, that if the DC Department of Health or the Bowser administration will not cooperate with the committee, that you turn to the federal government, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, otherwise known as NIOSH. They are experts in terms in National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, Mr. Chairman, are experts on what amplified noise can do in the workplace. I am sure they would be more than happy to cooperate with this committee.
Yes. Well, as you know, what the bill says is 95 measured at the source. If we're outdoors, if we're inside a commercial establishment, and I'm thinking in your neighborhood inside the Clydes, and it would be 65 decibels measured inside. And if it would be a residential unit such as yours, it would be 55 decibels inside. And of course, the decibel level changes by distance. So 55, if I remember correctly, a rough calculation, if you're on the second or third or fourth floor, if it's 95 at the street level, it's probably about 55 up in your apartment, if I remember correctly. So that's why it has the different levels. Part of the challenge with the current law is that it requires measurement from inside. So you call, and then the city has to respond with somebody who is trained and has a calibrated meter, and then they have to get inside your apartment. And of course, the noise source of the noise has to be continuing, which is essentially impossible. I did want to quickly touch on MPD. So the reason why MPD is so, you're so positive about MPD is because they respond after 10 p.m. But this problem of this extra loud noise, music, whatever, is before 10 p.m. as well as after 10 p.m., correct?
It does occur before 10 p.m., but they're handcuffed. It's not a pun. The police cannot do anything because the law says 10 p.m.
Yeah, but
You know,
what I'm getting at is that it's not enough for us to just say, well, MPD will enforce it after 10 p.m. There needs to be an enforcement mechanism before 10 p.m.
you could make, how about 9 p.m.? I think, we have a number of school children that
You're
live
talking
in our-
about for the police.
the police.
Yeah, I'm talking about this bill.
Yeah,
This bill is 24/7,
yeah.
and you want that.
We want it 24/7. I'm just making a suggestion that should be 24/7. Somehow, maybe an amendment to the bill that, that would stipulate that the citywide noise curfew would be moved up till 9 p.m. We have a number of children, young children that live in our building who go to DC public schools, who have to be in bed like 9:30, 9 p.m. And I think 9 p.m. is a reasonable hour. It's something for this committee to cogitate over and decide amongst yourselves whether you want to take on that issue of the curfew. I would make that recommendation.
One other thing, and this is not so much a question, and I'm over my time, but I think both you, Mr. Marks, and the others who've testified and anyone else who's watching, if you think licensing is the issue, send us supplemental comments, but be mindful that I think there is case law with regard to requiring licensing of buskers. My staff sent me a note that said that the Supreme Court has held several times that requiring busking permits is unconstitutional. Now, I haven't checked that out, but for those who are advocating licensing, give us your comments, but in light of what the case law is. Microphone.
Clearly, the courts are changing before our very eyes, as we saw yesterday. So, what was case law yesterday or a year ago or 10 years ago is evolving. So, but we'll get those comments to you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
I
Thank
think
you.
we call that the principle of stare decisis. That was a joke.
Very funny.
Nobody laughed.
It was a very funny joke.
Thank you.
Okay, I do believe that concludes this panel. I know we were thinking, I know Kimon is still trying to get here. I don't think
Madam Chairwoman,
Yes,
may I quickly respond to the Chairman's last question.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you again for the conversation around the 10 p.m. piece. I think there's something that's being left out, and we have to take into consideration two simple things. And we've testified as Yoba about this before. The two things to take into consideration. We have to also be cognizant that we are a major metropolitan city, and where you decide to move should not then make it dependent upon the community to change their way of living and thinking on your behalf. If you move into a busy bustling corridor with loud noise and activity, it's going to sound different. When our owner managers build or maintain properties there, that's what's to be expected. They understand that the buildings and properties that they're going to have in Columbia Heights on Thursdays through Sundays are going to hear loud noise because there's going to be a bar scene. They understand if they're going to have properties near one of the arenas, there's going to be a crowd and loud noise, as opposed to having something in a more remote or lower density part of the city. I think that's vitally important. B, I also caution if we get into too much about how music is regulated. One of the premier musical or genres that's most prevalent in the District of Columbia is go-go. Go-go started and blew up by young groups of young men playing in downtown areas, in areas around K Street, L Street, 17th Street, 18th Street, 19th Street, 20th Street. Most of those performances will be deemed illegal if we would continue to tweak this legislation to a certain level. And that has been something that has catapulted and promoted certain parts of our city for the last 40 or 50 years. By not thinking about that, just because we may not deem it music or you may not like the way it sounds, it's something that we have to take into consideration, because one person may like go-go, one person may like classical, but something that they don't like being played or amplified at a certain level doesn't mean that it's wrong.
You're good? Okay.
I want to do one thing, if I may.
Yes.
I neglected to say this earlier, Madam Chair, but the committee of the whole will be scheduling a hearing on Bill 25-750, either in late September or early October. And that's the Harmonious Living Bill.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I have to go to a markup. I'll try to get back.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you to the witness.
Thank you very much to this panel. Our next panel is regarding Ikoke Tambe, Benjamin Colbert, Robin Manukian, and Edward Bukaj, Community Associations Institute District of Columbia Legislative Action Committee Co-Chair. If you are in the Zoom, please accept an invitation to be promoted to the panel. And if you are in person and I have called your name, please join us at the witness table. Thank you for your patience while we get everybody promoted to the panel. All right, we will begin with Caitlin Peter. You may begin when you're ready.
Thank you. And I apologize, my camera is not detecting, so I'll be off camera.
No problem.
Good morning, Chairperson Nadeau and members of the Committee on Public Works and Operations. My name is Catalin Peter, and I'm the Vice President of Government Relations for the Apartment and Office Building Association of Metropolitan Washington, D.C. I represent our residential portfolio here in D.C. Since 1974, AOBA has served as the leading membership organization representing commercial office buildings and multifamily residential real estate in the Washington, D.C. area. As Eric mentioned, my colleague previously, our residential portfolio spans all 8 wards of the district, with members representing over 1,000 communities and managing over 100,000 apartment homes. I am here today as an advocate and representative of our industry to provide testimony on the Licensing for Accountability of Management of Properties, LAMP Amendment Act. This legislation has been a work in progress since it was originally brought forth by Councilmember Anita Bonds in 2017. It was brought on behalf of members of the DC Real Estate Commission when Chairperson Bonds served as the chair of the Housing Committee. Part of the impetus for the bill was a growing number of mishandled property management work being undertaken by certain individuals. In the world of real estate sales, agents must be both licensed and operate under a licensed broker. While individual property managers have recently been required to obtain an individual license to operate, there has been no requirement to operate under a licensed broker. In cases of misconduct, only they, not their brokerages or their companies, may be held liable. The Real Estate Commission, a deeply esteemed body charged with guarding the public on matters related to real estate, has been tackling issues of licensure for property management professionals for many years. Often, the Commission is faced with grave cases of misconduct where there is no real way to provide justice to the aggrieved party, as many of the individuals may flee or have no real assets. We see the LAMP bill as an effort to close some of these loopholes to ensure there is a greater level of professional responsibility in the world of property management. AOBA stands ready to work together with members of the Real Estate Commission and the committee on this legislation. We aim to move forward a bill that strikes the right balance between placing greater guardrails on the practice of property management, as well as ensuring those who are currently doing their utmost due diligence do not have to face additional obstacles in their practice, particularly when the retention of quality professionals has been quite difficult. In fact, though, we do believe this bill may actually need more teeth to hold those causing harm in our industry properly accountable. While we do not know exactly what this may look like, we are confident we can work together with the Real Estate Commission and Director Crow on viable methods. Otherwise, well-meaning actors and residents of the District of Columbia will have to continue paying for the wrongdoings of certain individuals in the long term. Overall, we thank the committee as well as the Real Estate Commission for their work on this legislation. As AOBA, the representatives of the property management industry, we absolutely look forward to working together on its ultimate passage. We are happy to answer any questions, and thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Burka?
Sorry, one moment while I get my testimony pulled up. Good morning, Chairwoman Nadeau and Councilmember Pinto. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to submit testimony on the proposed legislation entitled Licensing for Accountability of Management of Properties, or LAMP Amendment Act of 2023. My name is Scott Burka, and I'm president of EJF Real Estate Services. We are a common interest community management company managing over 500 condominium, cooperative, and homeowner associations in the district, comprising over 20,000 homes and roughly 30,000 DC residents. I've been in the industry for over 30 years, 25 of those running my own management company. And as an industry leader, EJF is extremely focused on professionalism, both within our firm as well as within the industry at large. In 2018, I served on a task force with the Real Estate Commission, as well as Leon Lewis and Kevin Cyrus of DCRA, to evaluate this issue of licensing for our industry. Ultimately, it was acknowledged that the existing licensing for quote-unquote property managers in the district did not truly address our industry, nor the events caused by Ms. Cryer, and that there was already more relevant and better education opportunities available to managers in the industry, and that in fact, DCRA at the time had ruled licensing within the community association industry was not required. I think it's important to understand that within the property management industry, there are different types of management. There are those that are affiliated with AOVA, as Ms. Peters just talked about. There are real estate agents. There is also the type of common interest community management in which I'm referring to. 10 years ago, the prior management company that I owned was directly involved with several clients who sustained damage from Ms. Lorraine Cryer. And I personally dealt with her. She was not a very nice person, I'm glad. Based on this firsthand knowledge, as well as my extensive experience within the industry, I'm deeply troubled by this proposed legislation. Of primary concern, licensing does not prevent bad apples from committing crimes. The DC Real Estate Commission and associated guarantee funds that real estate agents pay into is proof of this. The same is actually true within the DC bar and the legal profession. Additionally, and unfortunately, there have been periodic examples within the community association industry, within the DMV and nationally, of licensed firms committing fraud, even when they are, fully licensed. Secondly, this legislation does not address the need to educate the general public, and in fact provides a false sense of security. This legislation appears to be brought based on a single individual who committed wrongdoing over 10 years ago. My direct involvement with two of Ms. Crier's clients, one of who engaged my firm quickly and one that didn't, demonstrated that the repercussions of a board of directors being uneducated. The second firm had the opportunity to switch to another company, a firm that was not only run by two licensed DC real estate brokers, but also a firm that held multiple professional designations and accreditation within the common interest community industry. This client chose to ignore all of that licensing and professional designations and accreditation and subsequently sustained a loss. Fourthly, the legislation does not address the underlying availability of a safety net available to clients via insurance. Had this former client had the proper insurance, they would have been able to recover their funds in full. Fifth and finally, this legislation will place a hardship on firms like EJF, requiring additional education, testing, and expense that will create a barrier to entry for new firms and for ongoing companies such as ours, at a time when the industry already struggles with bringing workers into the industry. B25-0649 will not accomplish the purported goals the Real Estate Commission is attempting to address. There are multiple alternative solutions that should be thoroughly discussed among the stakeholders first before legislation like this is contemplated. Thank you for the opportunity to testify regarding this important legislation.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Ms. Tambe?
Good morning, Councilmember Nadeau. My name is Ekoke Tambe, and I currently manage a 302-unit luxury association in Southwest DC. I began my career as a manager of common interest communities in May of 1991, managing tenant associations, which were later converted to co-ops with funds from Wish and Mana, small to mid-sized condominium associations in DuPont Circle neighborhood, independent owner apartments and small office buildings in the Meridian neighborhood. I initially obtained a real estate license in 1992 as a statutory requirement to sell shares in the tenant associations we converted into co-ops. The requirements to be a licensed real estate agent only assisted in my knowledge to legally transfer shares to new owners, but did absolutely nothing in preparing me to manage the properties that were converted. Even the property management course offered as part of the real estate license core courses I was required to take, in great part, only helped with comprehending the building components. I obtained management knowledge from the president of the company, who was meticulous and strident in his zeal to educate new employees on industry best practices. I later discovered the Community Association Institute in late 1992 in my own zeal to improve knowledge in managing common interest communities. By now, you must be wondering why my story is important and or compelling in the discussion of B25-0649. You will hear compelling arguments both for and against this bill. At the end of the day, I truly hope you will have enough information to conclude that however well-meaning this legislation is, it does not need to be enacted in the way it is currently contemplated. One, because it does not achieve the desired purpose of preventing bad actors in the property management and or the community common interest industry to finagle their way into other people's funds. Two, obtaining a property management license does not provide common interest community managers in DC with the knowledge needed to manage common interest communities in DC. The Community Association Institute is best suited to educate managers of common interest communities in all aspects of managing common interest communities. Three, it generates an undue burden on the pockets of individual managers without any added value, primarily because firms would undoubtedly pass through this expense related to obtaining and maintaining these licenses to their managers. Four, it will temper, and I mean really temper, the interest of new managers as they contemplate careers in our industry. As a long-term DC resident, my sincere gratitude for the opportunity to testify before you today on this important legislation and for your service to our proud and vibrant city. And I hope that this would at least, in the very least, make you consider and reconsider this legislation as not good for our industry. I'm available for any questions now or in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Mr. Colbert?
Thank you and good morning. Again, I want to echo everyone who has gone before me. Much like my other colleagues, I have been doing property management for about 20 years in the tri-state area. The hardest and perhaps the most devastating moments I have in my career is when we have a transition. We found the prior management was not being honest with the board of directors. Much like Mr. Burka, I have gone through several instances where licensed and bonded property managers, individual managers, have chosen to disrobe themselves of ethics. And that's what I want to focus on in my discussion, because I believe everyone else has truly made the point. As someone who has been doing this job for 20 years and has a degree in sociology, no course is going to change someone's point of view. If they're going to commit a crime, they will commit a crime. That is, there are rehabilitation aspects, but that is not what the process that DC is putting forth will do. I do think that ethics are very important, more so as we serve homeowners, the most important thing to people's lives. We protect their homes. What we need to do is ensure that there are other processes, as again, Mr. Burke and others have stated, having fidelity insurance and the like. As much as I wish that a simple course would imbue a property manager with the idea and forthrightness to be honest and transparent, people will unfortunately be people. This has been true in all of our lives as we interact. So adding, again, as Koya said, undue burdens, additional hurdles for us to move forward when we are struggling to find people who are interested in this job will just hurt everyone. In the end, it is our duty to help shepherd and aid board members, aid the community, and to do so, we must be given the freedom and the ability to do so without being unduly burdened. While again, I laud and applaud the fact that there is concern about this because it is terrifying. I remember having to testify in some of those trials. It is not a pleasant time saying, where did the money go and why? We need to be empowered, not stymied. And then I believe that an opposite view of the bill would be the most appropriate thing if it is at all going to move forward. It is not giving us additional hurdles, like, oh, I can use the word, but to empower property managers. That is truly what we need so we can better serve, our clients. Thank you for letting me testify.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Ms. Manugian?
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Mendelson, Chair Nadeau, and members of the DC Council. My name is Robin Manugian, and I'm an insurance broker with 30 years of experience in specializing in insuring condominium and homeowners associations throughout the District of Columbia. I'm also a community association insurance consultant to the District of Columbia Legislative Action Committee. Those are the members that you've already heard from this morning. The DC LAC is a committee of CAI, or Community Associations Institute, and CAI represents individuals and professionals who reside in or work in community associations throughout DC. Along with my CAI colleagues, I also oppose B25-0649, Accountability of Management Properties, the LAMP Act, for the following reasons. I believe the costs associated with what would be a startup licensing, continuing education, and oversight office would place undue financial burden on the management industry that serves community associations. Manager licensing legislation has been attempted in other states, including neighboring Maryland, and research from CAI conducted has determined that the cost per manager would likely be $750 to $850 every 2 years, an expense that would prohibit, if not turn off, newer managers from joining an industry that is already in dire need of more managers. Moreover, as a 25-year member of CAI, I know that CAI already affords its manager members with a considerable amount of education and credentialing opportunities, including in-person and virtual classes and webinars, out-of-state conferences that are inclusive of continuing education, and peer support that frankly is more effective and through a more affordable membership. A license will not prevent bad character behavior, nor will it ensure any standard of education or service. As a licensed professional myself, I have to be licensed to be a broker in any of the states that I do business in. I'm required to take 24 credits of continuing education every 2 years. But frankly, those continuing ed credits do nothing to enhance my ability to do my job. It's really how I conduct myself outside of earning those credits, how I serve my clients, how I educate others, and how I conduct myself is really the most important thing, and it's not coming from any license I hold. The council and its constituents understandably have concerns regarding theft of association funds by a property manager or a property management company. My agency has paid claims exactly having to do with this, and I know that the stress for the associations that are impacted is enormous. As an insurance professional, what I would really like to see is for the DC Council to enact legislation that requires associations to carry what is called employee dishonesty or crime, or otherwise known as fidelity coverage, in an amount equal to at least 3 months of the gross annual assessments for an association, plus the total held in reserves. Such a provision in the Act would track lending requirements to ensure an association's funds are protected from theft should it happen. Unlike most states, DC has no such fidelity coverage law, relying instead to ensure that the coverage is carried. In short, a manager, licensed or not, can still steal money. What minimizes theft or is a deterrent to theft is an insurance policy carried by the association and a system of financial checks and balances as risk management. Because I do not believe a manager licensing law would be effective in in accomplishing its intended purpose. I ask that the council return an unfavorable report for B25-0649. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We'll now hear from Edward Bukash. Please hit the circle to, yep, there you go.
Sorry. Dear Chair Mendelson, Chair Pro Tem McDuffie, and Council Members Bond, White Jr., Henderson, Nadeau, Pinto, Fruman, George, Parker, Allen, Gray, and White Sr. On behalf of the Community Association Institute, District of Columbia Legislation Action Committee, and approximately 116,000 Washingtonians living in 49,000 homes in and around 2,000 communities, associations across the district, we wish to thank you for this opportunity to provide comment on B25-0639, Licensing for Accountability of Management and Properties Amendment Act of 2023. CAI opposes the legislation for two primary reasons. First, licensing does not prevent fraudulent acts by managers, as you heard. Second, licensing requirements do not provide the benefits of effective community management training. Effective community management training and certifications developed by community association professionals for community association professionals are already available, and there is a clear demand for the kind of specialized training grounded in lived experiences that they provide. Additionally, fidelity coverage for community associations address the need for protection from dishonest acts, and it is an existing best practice for community associations. While not presently required by the Act, fidelity coverage is required by most lenders. Instead of creating a new manager licensure program supported by taxpayer funds during a period of fiscal uncertainty for the district, CAI encourages the self-regulation and national certification of community association managers. Imposing licensing requirements unrelated to the skills necessary for effective community association managers creates unnecessary barriers of entry and does not provide consumer protections. This is especially true for populations such as immigrants with work authorizations, individuals with criminal records, low-income, unemployed, and dislocated workers, as well as veterans and military spouses. With this bill, does instead create a new tax on the district's working families as individuals looking to begin a career and attain economic stability are instead forced to navigate bureaucratic barriers and potentially pay expensive licensing fees that would put them at an increased disadvantage before they can even begin. Consumer protection is also a priority for the Community Association Institute. As noted, it is already the best practice of community association and a requirement of the secondary lenders that boards secure a fidelity bond to protect association funds against potential losses that could result from fraudulent acts committed not only by board members, but also by community association managers. This practice, required by most governing documents for community associations in this jurisdiction, addresses the argument that without a licensing requirement, bad actors may be hired who can then commit dishonest acts affecting an association. Instead of creating a new manager licensure program supported by taxpayer funds, CAI encourages the self-regulation and national certification of community association managers. There is a viable and effective industry alternative to the requisite training courses associated with state-mandated manager licensure programs, including the Certified Manager of Community Associations, CMCA program, administered by the Community Association Managers International Certification Board. This program requires prerequisite education, a comprehensive examination of entry-level knowledge, that was developed based upon rigorous standards set forth by the National Commission for Certifying Agencies. Required adherence to CMCA standards of professional conduct, enforcement of those standards, and continuing education requirements. The CMCA program allows the state to have industry-developed licensed professionals without requiring the state to create a new regulatory bureaucracy to administer a licensure program or tasking existing state employees to administer a program for which they may not have the real-world experience necessary to evaluate for efficacy. CAI encourages the self-regulation of the community management profession through professional certification and designation programs developed by industry professionals for the profession. CAI supports the protection of homeowners and community associations through increasing professionalism, the training of community association managers, and appropriate insurance coverage. Additionally, the Professional Certification Coalition, PCC, a coalition organized via the American Society of Association Executives, notes the economic impact of credentials with a study showing that professional certification creates a door opener for unlicensed careers, and mid-career professionals are also able to benefit economically from professional certification.
Mr. Bakash, I'm going to have you end there because we're a minute over and I do have it all in writing, so we should be good.
Okay, let me just thank you. For these reasons, CAI urges you to oppose this troubling legislation, and please feel free to contact us. And thank you all for the opportunity to provide our comment here today.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Okay, so we will start with Ms. Peter. You bring up an important point as to how this proposed licensure structure is similar to the real estate broker licensure model. What benefit does brokerage licensure provide in the real estate industry?
I can speak to this because my former role was the General Counsel and VP of Government Affairs for the Realtor organization. It cannot operate without a broker. There are a myriad of rules and liabilities, legal requirements that effectively mandate that agents must have a broker. It cannot operate without a broker in sales. That's a very short answer. I mean, I could list it all out, but there's just absolutely no, it's akin to, and I do think the insurance policy is very important. That was brought up by our colleagues at the Community Association. There's a level of insurance and liability that a broker takes on for its agents. And again, this is different than property management because you are dealing with sales of real estate, of real property. And so when you're dealing with such sales, you have very, very high levels of liability, and you need that insurance that when you are selling real property, that there is someone directly reliable and having all of the necessary insurance for those sales.
And in your experience, has brokerage licensing discouraged opening of new brokerages in the district?
No, I mean, it can't operate without, you must have a brokerage to be able to do sales of real property. The two, I really don't think the two are comparable, sales in terms and rentals. I do feel it's a bit, I don't feel that comparing those two is, it seems helpful, and there are similarities, sure, but in that sense, you must have brokerage licenses.
Thank you very much. Everyone else, thank you for your testimony. Does anyone want to chime in and share more about how proper insurance can dissuade misconduct of property management companies?
I can take that question. So, one of the troubling things, so full transparency, I'm a resident of Maryland. Maryland, through the Condominium Act, includes a requirement that there be fidelity coverage. And it's that limit is based on the 3 months of gross income, total held and reserves. And then as a professional, when I work on a renewal every year, we look at a client's budget and balance sheet so that that limit is not always staying the same. It's if they're reserving more, then we're going to increase the fidelity limit. As a deterrent, it's not necessarily a deterrent, but it is written so that if there is a theft of funds, we make the association whole again. And then in turn, the management company is the one stealing the money. We subrogate or go after the management company for that theft of funds. Is it a safety net? It absolutely is safety net. And then when we take an application for fidelity coverage, we need to make sure that there's a system of checks and balances. Risk management. Insurance is risk transfer, but we're not going to unnecessarily burden the carrier if there's no system of checks and balances. So we want to make sure that under the operating account, there's a threshold for which the manager has check writing authority. Managers typically don't have check writing authority under the reserve account without prior approval of the board member. And then we have 2 or dual signatures from board members drawing from the reserve account. So we really do need to be looking at something that requires within the Act in DC a requirement to have fidelity coverage. Typically, the lenders are requiring this, but not always. So, and if the association's fidelity coverage is not written properly, meaning management is not included as an additional insured, then you could have a theft of funds that doesn't include theft by a property management company.
Do you happen to know how much more fidelity coverage may cost compared to what is currently required for the associations?
Nothing's required by the associations. If it's included in their association governing documents, then they're probably already carrying it. The lenders are requiring that 3 months plus reserves, but every association in DC is going to have, different budget, different balance sheet. And so, I write some fidelity limits that are $6 million and I write some that are 250,000. So each has to be underwritten individually.
Ms. Tambe, did you want to?
Yeah, I would just to add to that for clarification purposes, I think it is important to know that whereas it is an individual company that runs an apartment association with condominium associations and common interest associations, these are individual unit owners who own the totality of the building in their capacity with their, combining joint interest. And each one has to go to a lender who has their own requirements with respect to whether or not the association through their management company has adequate fidelity insurance. So there are 3 layers, not just from the insurance company side of it, but also on the lending side of it, and also from the management company side of it, because no management company wants to go into managing a property without necessarily having fidelity insurance for their own company in the event that some bad actor who is a manager decides to steal money and they are not covered. So you've got this whole barrier around the system, which is already in place, which no licensing that the property management license would bring to bear to be as effective as what we currently have at the moment.
Mr. Burka?
Yeah, just to echo on this, when I'm actually talking to prospective clients, we focus in on the insurance. Most attorneys will require our firms like us to have that within the contract and state how much we have to have. Usually it's at least $1 million. My firm has over $5 million. But what's important for the board of directors, that volunteer board, to understand is that the protection there is not just for the management company, but also for acts committed by their co-board members. And so we're all just thinking about, constituents being taken advantage of by the management company, but it can also be by their co-owners. And so the insurance on both sides, both from the management company perspective and being held by the association, really eliminates all of that risk. And I say this a little bit jokingly, but the example I give to prospective clients is, if one of my employees decides that they'd rather live in the Bahamas, I've got insurance. You don't even have to wait to get my insurance. You can file a claim under your own association's insurance and subrogate, as Ms. Manoogian was describing before. But the other side of that is, if the treasurer on the board decides that it'd be better to live in the Bahamas, then the association has coverage right there and then as well. And so that really is the linchpin in educating, or as Ms. Manoogian said, requiring it within the Condo Act, that these insurance policies be held by both the association and the management company. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Peter?
Can you hear me? Okay, I think you can. I do echo that. We've heard that from our members too, is that yes, what this bill is trying to do is an issue, and there are problems. It's those insurance components and those liability components of how you get to that, like Scott mentioned, and if there are alternative ways to get to that insurance liability issue. Whereas if an individual property manager or property or leasing agent, there's no accountability or there's no insurance, it may not matter if that does not exist. That's where the teeth, I think, that we were requesting may come into play. Thank you.
Thank you. I am encouraged to hear that insurance can protect these associations. What stops these companies from continuing to take advantage of others, particularly if subrogation is not successful?
I don't think that there's anything that stops them. So I've been involved in many of these thefts. What makes the association whole is the insurance. And making certain that the management company is an additional insured under that policy, so that we cover the claim. I don't think you can legislate behavior in people. If there's an opportunity to steal and someone can do it, they're going to do it. And so that's why insurance is there. It's built in and a requirement of the lenders, and as Scott mentioned, a requirement of management contracts that the association have fidelity coverage in place. Mandating a certain behavior, I don't think is achievable, not even through a license.
Mr. Colbert?
Again, it's I'll take this for labeling theory in a sense. Again, trying to pull on the background of my education are part of it. We've already built a society of property managers through CAI, the conferences, the communication. We work and talk to our colleagues, having the peer pressure where if word gets out, you're in trouble because we do talk. That can be a better deterrent than, hey, take this course. And again, I don't want to say that education's a bad thing. I almost have my master's in education. I was almost a teacher that I realized what a bad idea that was when I was 19. But the honest thing is that property managers need to be respected. We need to be valued as working individuals. And to do so, we need to be able to do our job. We need to have the support from government to have our job. Again, I manage properties in the tri-state area. I know far too many laws in far too many counties. And the best ones I have authority over are in Maryland, because with the CCOC in Montgomery County, for example, and what they're trying to do in PG County, we have been supported with what Ms. Manoogian already said. These are built into contracts. These are built into our brokerages. So I won't name names, but when again, you go to appeals, when you have these contests, I have backup so I can do my job. The point is, you should have the education from CAI. They provide that. Like you go together, you talk, you have a few drinks, you go, oh, well, that's a great idea. And you have that camaraderie. We know what we're supposed to do because we are a service industry. And you can tend to tell a bad apple and then you can pressure them. So again, I want to say thank you for this is a problem. Point blank, I appreciate the fact that there are actions being taken regarding this. I just don't think they're the appropriate to solve the problem. And I'd rather there be communication, dialogue, and attempts than not, so then we can get somewhere. But I do think we already have the built-in processes with education. What we need is support for legislation, for insurance, to make sure that should there be a bad actor, bad apple, someone who thought the Bahamas is a great time, which currently with the weather, not a bad idea. That's what we need. We need you to help us so we can make sure we can protect our own.
Ms. Tambe?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. Just to continue on this bandwagon, I'm sure you're going to be tired of us, sounding like a broken record. But having taken the property management course to get the property management license and doing what we do in an industry, so you've got to, it's bifurcated, yeah. You've got to look at it and say, these are all experts in the industry under the big umbrella that most people call property management. But we are not, there's commercial property management, there's residential property management, and then there's common interest property management. We're all divided as specialties, and the one cannot be introduced in the other as a mechanism for preventing bad action. And that is the point that I would want to leave with you today. It's like asking a neurologist to go take a test that an otolaryngologist would be required to take. They're both medical professionals. They're both experts in their industry, but the one expertise is totally and diametrically opposed one from the other, such that having to take that course would be so inutile that it would just be a money-grabbing effort, which I don't believe that the council really wants to do. I think you've seen a legitimate problem. Several different actors in the industry, in the property management industry writ large, are brought to you, and you're looking for solutions. We, from the Community Association Institute, specifically the DC Legislative Action Committee of that institute, we're coming to you and say, we've got ideas, we've got solutions, we've got ways in which, because we want to work with you to make sure that we drive out the people who are making us sound like used car salespeople, because we honor our profession and we want to be able to say, come join us. We want to go into schools and invite and produce people who want to come and be crazy in this stressful industry, but we want to do so in an effective manner. And we're saying, call on us. We've got ideas. We want to join you in making sure that we don't have people who prefer the Bahamas, albeit the fact that they've got a hurricane happening now, and then actually doing work and more seriously and making us look good.
Thank you. Ms. Manukian?
Yeah, I just wanted to, Ben made a really good point a moment ago that when the word gets out that there has been a theft, it's not good for that management company. One of the things that I've seen recently, I had an association in Chevy Chase lose $75,000 because a management company principal had stolen $900,000 from a variety of associations, including several in the District of Columbia. Those associations never filed claims, and that's because the management company themselves stepped up and paid those losses and messengered over money so that the association would not have to go through the heartache of filing a claim. When you have a fidelity loss, there is a forensic accounting that has to come in. You file a police report. It's a lengthy process. The management company, and I'm not going to say who they are, it did an incredibly classy job of making this issue go away. They don't want the notoriety of having that claim, and they made certain that the insurance wasn't touched. But that's one thing that is really a deterrent, is the bad PR that you would get from having a theft.
Mm-hmm.
And I have seen management companies in the area go down in our location from one manager. There's a company that is, 20 years ago went totally out of business because one of the executives stole and everybody pulled out. And so the industry really polices itself.
Yeah.
But
So this is interesting and obviously great for those associations that were made whole, but if a management company steps in and does that, then the jurisdiction loses the opportunity for due process against the bad actor. So there's no claims filed, there's no police reports. How do we as a jurisdiction stop that from happening? Make sure that that manager doesn't just go to another company and do it. Not sure that was really the right thing to do, if it, even though it was.
yeah, I mean, legislation.
He's in, the guy is in prison now on tax evasion, so he got his comeuppance. But I understand that if you're viewing it as brushing the problem under the rug, and we view it as taking responsibility for the act of your employee. So it's better to not go through insurance, but insurance is there in the event that it happens. And we have a management company that either won't or cannot fiscally take on the cost of making everyone whole.
Yeah. I think
Touched on the additional cost of licensing, estimating it to be as much as $850 per manager. Could someone walk me through the detail of what's included in that estimate? Is that licensure and education costs?
So you have to set up an office, much like there's the DC Insurance Administration, the Maryland Insurance Administration. Those are very large outfits that you have oversight of people like myself who are brokers. You'd have to put that kind of office into place to, develop continuing education, monitor licensing, get all the licenses renewed. And so you're really having to put together an office where right now there is none. And you might see in 20 years time, when I renew my license in the district, it costs me $80 every 2 years to do that. But you might see that the cost of that go down once you have an established office. But that could take a couple of decades to really get to that point.
But I think more so for the manager, when I talked about it, is that currently we've got an institute, the Community Association Institute, where we as managers, individual managers, have to go through different courses to get different designations from the CMCA, which was touched upon earlier on, to the PCAM, which is the highest of all the licenses. And as a manager, you have to maintain your individual designations in from the CMCA, AMS, and PCAM. Those independently as the cost about $185 each. And then to add another licensure on a property management coursework, which does not totally directly implicate what we do in the common interest community, it's just going to add an additional financial burden onto us, which currently we don't have. And frankly, not to be gauche about it, do not need, because they're again, like I explained earlier, ma'am, we're totally different entities and totally different specialties. And wanting the Property Management Association, AOBA, or the DC Real Estate Commission to be the party that regulates common interest communities in the District of Columbia. Again, it's like asking a neurologist to take an otolaryngologist course. They're all medical professionals, but totally different specialties in the medical field.
Thank you. Mr. Colbert, did you have something to add before I move to my next question?
No, they mostly covered it, unfortunately.
That's okay. We don't all have to say everything. It's all right. Mr. Burka, I wanted to ask you a few questions about your experience with former clients of Ms. Sears, including the client that chose not to switch to your firm despite the number of licenses and professional designations your firm had. I wanted to clarify, did Ms. Sewer not have a DC property management license at the time, or what did you mean by that?
I'm not aware of what she had or did not have at the time. I know that she came from a well-known management company within the industry. I know that she provided oversight of that company while the owner was out for health reasons, and then left that company to go on her own. This was probably around 2012, somewhere in that time frame. And she was, working to pick up clients of her own or taking them from that prior management company. I don't know what licenses she had. I do know that we worked with two clients, one that made the switch quickly, the other started to make the switch and then waited.
Hi there. So do you have any idea why this client chose to stay with that firm? Because this is a case where that reputation did seem to follow her and allow her to continue to harm associations.
So I have some ideas. I can't say for certain. This client that did choose to stay with her was a lower socioeconomic building, primarily Hispanic speaking. I think she was Hispanic speaking as well. And I think they just, ignored everything else and put faith. That was my reading on it.
Okay. Ms. Tombe, the last word.
Yes, ma'am. And this is a prime example of why fidelity insurance is so important. Now, I would even urge the council to mandate that of all companies that open and function in the District of Columbia. And as we have said consistently, you can never ever legislate good behavior in cases like this. But if you would put guardrails whereby somebody who decides to do something like this does not leave the people who are affected adversely in the red by being able to be covered by insurance, it would greatly help. That's one of the ways in which to start doing it, would be my recommendation.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add?
I just appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for your testimony.
Thank you, ma'am.
This concludes today's hearing. Thank you all for your participation. If you've not yet submitted written testimony, please do so by submitting it on the council's hearing management system. The record for this hearing will close at 5 p.m. on July 17th, 2024. The time is now 11:56 a.m. and this hearing is adjourned.